available after the event. Please do use the Q&A function to ask your questions to our speakers, which we will put to them after their presentations. Do also feel free to use the chat function if you want to put information or share information with other people on the call, but please do use the Q&A function if it's actually a question that you want to ask of the panel, just so that we can keep those different things separate. So just to briefly introduce the event, what are we hoping to cover today? So what we're hoping to get from this afternoon's session is to provide participants with the opportunity to hear about universities engaged in civic work and to discuss their civic work following the recent launch of 2 universities that are talking to us today. We're hoping that they will give us an opportunity to hear what's going well, but also, as always, we're very interested in the challenges they're facing. What are those things that they're perhaps finding difficult about implementation? Because I think there's so much more that we can learn from one another about things that are difficult. And this is absolutely not about just saying things are all going really well. So we look forward to hearing from our 2 universities this afternoon on their experience so far. I think we're going to share in the chat a link to the NCIA, which was launched last week, and this will just give you an opportunity to see a bit more about what that will cover, and this sort of exciting opportunity for how we're going to develop the Civic University network over the next 3 years through this new accelerator opportunity. So then I'd like to move on to introducing our speakers for this afternoon. We're first of all going to hear from Queen Mary University, and then we will be followed by Aston University. After each presentation, I'll just give a little bit of time for some sort of immediate questions, but those are perhaps more about sort of specifics about the presentation rather than general questions. We'll pick up general questions at the end of both presentations. So I'll pass over to colleagues at Queen Mary who are going to introduce themselves as they speak. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Greg. We'll just wait for the slides to pop up and then we'll get going. Excellent. Thanks, Shireen. If you can move to the next slide, please. So hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Gifford. I am the Community Engagement Manager based in the Centre for Public Engagement at Queen Mary. And I'm here with 2 of my colleagues today, Sarah Barnes and Alison Blunt. We're a small team of 3 at the centre, and we support and enable academics, staff and students across our faculties to engage people outside of academia with their research, teaching and other core university business. And we've been leading on formulating Queen Mary CUA ever since 2019, so quite a few years ago now. I'll firstly provide a little bit of context for those of you who don't know Queen Mary and where we are very well. We're a Russell Group university operating across 5 campuses in London, and our 2 largest campuses are situated in Tower Hamlets, so in Mile End and Whitechapel, where we were first founded in the 1880s on the principles of engaging local communities through our People's Palace. We've got a long history of doing so through our teaching, research, volunteering and other initiatives. And for those of you who don't know Tower Hamlets in East London as well, it's an amazingly vibrant place to live and work with its strengths and identity firmly linked to its diversity and the strong communities and organisations rooted here. It also has many linked and connected challenges too. So poverty, child poverty, pay inequalities, and lower than the national average healthy life expectancies, which the pandemic elevated many of these injustices within our Somali and Bangladesh communities in particular over the past few years. So uniting these 2 contexts of Queen Mary and Tower Hamlets and wider East London, the UPP call to action for universities it really struck a chord with the CPE at Queen Mary, and we really wanted to develop that future direction that Queen Mary could take with our civic strategy to be as impactful as we could and to implement and practice what we preach to our other academics and students across the board. Our approach has been, like I said, a long one, but it's been well considered and planned for. So where other universities may have focused on partnerships with their big anchor local institutions, we wanted to go a little bit further and involve more sectors and more voices within our CUA, and just for us to be a little bit more impactful and inclusive in shaping what we do next in our particular area. And as you can see here, we're also a founding partner with Sheffield Hallam and others on the Civic University Network, contributing to those national conversations around place-based work and responsibilities for universities. We also have a London forum, which we help to coordinate, which focuses on civic engagement and bringing others together across London, which I think will pop a link in the chat for anyone who's interested in coming along to our next one in a few weeks' time. But more on our CUA. So we saw the opportunity for Queen Mary to really listen and learn from the wealth of knowledge locally from our residents, from our community groups, businesses, charities, all the stakeholders across East London who we work with already, as well as those who we don't and didn't at the time, and probably for the first time, honestly, institution-wide, that we've taken this approach. And we realised that we needed to work with our local experts to do this really well, and to co-create and shape all of the elements of our civic approach and those future commitments that Queen Mary have and will make. So from November 2020 to 21, we worked with community organisers in Citizens UK and our local branch of London Citizens to apply those community organising principles to design and then run a community listening campaign. And I'll provide more details on that shortly. But next slide, please, Shireen. And then in early 2021, we worked with the Institute for Community Studies, another local partner of ours, who helped us to then co-analyse all the results and findings from that listening campaign, prioritise data and test the findings with many stages attached to that. We launched our agreement earlier this year in May to much success, and so far we've made some really great development in implementing that within Queen Mary and building capacity in our team for someone to focus on some of that implementation too. And we've also formed our new governance structures attached to the CUA as well, and Alison will give us more details on that a little bit later. So yes, it's taken us 3 years to form our civic agreement, taken much longer by the pandemic than we ever envisaged, but it's given us time to reflect and ensure that co-creation with our communities and anchor institutions has really worked and works for everybody. So next slide, please. So a little bit more on the listening campaign that we designed and implemented. This spanned across 7 East London boroughs, so not just focused on Tower Hamlets, which is where, like I said, our 2 biggest campuses are situated, but also to Hackney, Newham, Waltham Forest, Redbridge, Barking and Dagenham, and others. And that work had 3 strands attached to it. So we wanted to make sure that we were as inclusive as possible across that piece. So we ran a series of one-to-one interviews with community leaders and stakeholders, including faith leaders, school leadership teams, non-profit community leaders, housing associations, businesses, MPs, local authority staff, and everyone else that you can think of. We ran a number of different focus groups with participants from across East London, and they were fantastic because it really brought together a really wide group of people who may not have been brought together otherwise, actually. So that was interested residents, local campaigners, community groups, business leaders, and they were all facilitated by London Citizens to ensure they were as objective as they could be, so not run by me and the team. And we also ran an online survey as well, but our initial plans were to hold all of this engagement and listening in person, to be able to expand on areas and delve into topics that came up. But we did have to shift this online with the pandemic, which had real challenges actually in terms of timing for us, because obviously, as I'm sure many of you on this call have found too, you know, during the past kind of 2 to 3 years, our community leaders and groups' priorities have been and capacity have been elsewhere, and understandably focused on supporting our local residents and communities in the day-to-day dealing with the pandemic and what was coming next. But nonetheless, we had many great conversations and really kind of with critical friends and new people that we hadn't engaged with as an institution before. And that insight was that we gathered was centered on 5 different things that we wanted to know. So the challenges and pressures that people and organizations faced, and not just of that moment in the pandemic, but, you know, over the past 3 to 5 years before that too. The opportunities in each of the boroughs and the places that they were primarily based within or served. East London-wide priorities, challenges and opportunities specifically about COVID-19 for them and their organisations and people, and ideas on the role Queen Mary as an anchor institution could or should respond to, and what role that the university should have in that next step. So we then worked with the Institute for Community Studies throughout last year to co-create those next steps. So the co-analysis of the listening campaign with community members, some of who were involved in that listening campaign, but as well as bringing new people on board, new organisations and leaders on that journey with us to expand that pool of engaged people. And we tested those emerging priorities and themes through running many priority setting groups of leaders and residents from across East London, but alongside Queen Mary staff and students as well. And the ICS also carried out interviews with internal teams within Queen Mary and leaders within their areas to better understand that civic context in their particular area and context across the university. And for us, it was super helpful for them to be able to have those frank conversations, which weren't coming from myself and the team. Perhaps it was really great to have an objective of external person and people helping us and supporting us with that too. So next slide, please. So what were the key opportunities that came out of all of this? So as well as the themes that we'll come on to of our civic agreement in a second, but what emerged from a lot of that insight was that there were a huge amount of strengths and opportunities, a lot of them not surprising for someone who works very closely with communities in East London. But we do have a really strong series of community networks and a strong third sector of VCS and faith organisations across East London, which really is a real strength, and one that sadly we and others rely on heavily to mobilise quickly, as we've seen during the pandemic, responding to the call to support residents where big local institutions were not able to through their pre-existing relationships and things like that. So that also has its challenges too, but the desire and the passion of our local people is definitely there. And East London has one of the youngest populations in the UK and is one of the most diverse places too. So many of our students are local, and one of the really refreshing things that came out of the co-analysis and the prioritisation workshops that we ran were actually how aligned our Queen Mary students and our community groups and leaders were in their thinking of the role the university should take, as they are our local residents as well, which was really refreshing actually. And also we have a huge amount of other strong local institutions within our borough and across East London. So we have one of the biggest NHS trusts with Barts Health NHS Trust alongside Canary Wharf, our big financial district for London, all situated within Tower Hamlets in East London. So next slide, please. So the 5 themes that emerged from all of this work across the years are these here, and some of them may not seem so unique to Queen Mary, having seen and looked at quite a lot of other agreements that have been launched since and before. But I think for us, it's how we interpret these themes as to making them unique to Queen Mary. So these 5 themes are the inclusive placemaking, so using our expertise as an anchor institution mission to champion our local agendas and bringing people together to strengthen our communities of place, and representing the needs of East London on a bigger level, on a national and international level, through many different mechanisms. We've got a healthy and sustainable future, so playing a vital role in protecting the future health and well-being and environmental sustainability across East London. Pathways for Life, which as a major employer and education provider in East London for many, many years, we've got an important role to play in improving those life chances of our neighbours, whether that's social divides and wealth inequalities, to unequal access to new digital technologies, and utilising those in our daily lives. There's a huge amount of work there. A cultural hub for East London, which is bringing together our rich arts and cultural sectors across the boroughs, and working alongside many community groups and arts organisations around celebrating that diversity across East London through arts and culture. And then enabling civic practice, which for us is around making sure that we have those processes and procedures in place within Queen Mary to make sure that civic and community engagement and public engagement is enabled easily for people to be able to navigate and to feel a little bit more welcoming to this, to this work and approach. So making sure that our teams across the institution are on board and work with us on different pockets of work. Next slide, please. So for this, again, here are the themes, and here's some of the sub work that we'd like to focus on over the next few years. And a lot of this, like I said, the ideas came out of all of that listening, came from our groups and bigger anchor institutions as well, coming together and prioritising what they think that Queen Mary should be focusing on next. So there's a huge amount of work to be done across all of these spheres, and we're getting going already, so which is great news. So next slide, please. We already have a great deal of brilliant work underway across these themes, which is really helpful for us because we will need to be mapping what is already happening across Queen Mary. I'm sure we're not alone in not knowing the full extent and the full profile of everything that happens under a civic agenda across an institution. So that's one of our first tasks that we'll be focusing on over the next term. But actually, how can we support and celebrate the existing work that happens? And one of the things that came out of a lot of the listening was, actually, Queen Mary, you don't do a great job at telling us all of these things that you already do. So that's definitely a call to action for us. So we have a Centre of the Cell, which is I think 20 years old, and the first science education centre in the world to be located within our biomedical research labs in Whitechapel. They work a lot with schools and families. We have our Legal Advice Centre again, which is around 20 years old, which provides one-to-one legal advice for local residents and projects across London. There's all sorts of different initiatives that they support, as well as providing students with that practical clinical learning and teaching as part of the curriculum, linking into that pro bono advice. We have the Festival of Communities, which is something close to my heart and something that I lead on day to day, which is our long-standing festival, collaborative festival with our organisations across Tower Hamlets, specifically bringing together Queen Mary staff and students, residents and community groups to explore living and learning and what that means in this place that we are in. And we also have the Season of Bangla Drama, which is a long-standing collaboration between our local authority in Tower Hamlets, us at Queen Mary, and many arts organisations, and it showcases the best of British Bengali theatre with a unique East London focus. So these are just like a few things that we already have going on. There are many, many more, which I'm not going to tell you about today, but if you want to follow up and ask any questions about that, happy to. But like I said, one of our first tasks will now be to carry out that audit of activity happening across Queen Mary under those themes and figure out where there may be opportunities to develop new activity, and how do we strengthen that activity that already exists under those remits. So I'll now hand over to Alison Blunt, who is our Deputy Vice Principal for Impact, Culture, Civic and Community, and she will talk us through our governance structures that we've established and more on those next steps.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and it's great to be here today and to be talking about our Civic University work at Queen Mary. Also really glad to introduce Sarah Barnes, who's the interim head of the Centre for Public Engagement at Queen Mary, and Sarah's going to be responding to some of the questions as well and put the slides together. So thank you very much, Sarah. So I thought I'd say a little bit about governance now that we have launched the agreement. What are our structures to ensure that we are, ways that we can best sort of have sort of effective governance structures for our civic work. So we have this on two different levels. We have, first of all, a civic advisory board, which has key external partners as well as senior internal colleagues providing oversight of our civic work and really scrutinising what we do, holding us to account, providing sort of strategic guidance. And then alongside that, we have our civic working group, which is comprised of internal colleagues, again, academics and professional service colleagues across the whole range of the work that we do at Queen Mary. We have invited 2 colleagues to lead each of the 5 themes, one of whom is academic and one is a professional service colleague. And so we're virtually there with all of the people who are leading on the different themes, and that's sort of ongoing. But just for them to be able to report back to the Civic Working Group about that particular theme, as well as the group to share much wider ideas and experience around the civic work that we're doing. And then the Civic Working Group reports up to the Civic Advisory Board. Next slide, please, Shireen. Alongside this, we have just launched, and we're having our first meeting next week, which is really exciting, the East London Research Network, which is a Queen Mary network. Again, recognising that so many colleagues are doing fantastic research in and on East London with many different community and other partners and collaborators, but wanting to sort of bring those colleagues together. And again, this is running alongside and often really will support our civic work. And we're having our first meeting. We've had over 100 colleagues have signed up for it already, which is great. And again, that's across our 3 faculties. That's medicine and dentistry, science and engineering, and humanities and social sciences. And it's just been a great way of finding out what lots of people are working on. And again, that connects with the sort of mapping of our civic activity. Again, launching the East London Research Network is another way we can sort of take an initial list of some of the really key people for us to talk to in terms of colleagues who are already doing a lot of work in East London. And we know about a lot of that work already, but this has sort of brought up lots of other work as well, which is great, and lots of opportunities for us to develop further collaborations, again, with external partners. And we're also in the process of developing a Civic Champions Network. And again, this is wanting to bring together internal and external colleagues around a particular theme of the Civic University Agreement. And this is building on successful events that were part of the process of developing the CUA and utilising our convening power locally. So we're in the process of that, and we're hoping to launch that network in the spring. But again, thinking that those networks will have particular focus on the different themes within our agreement. Next slide, please, Shireen. And as Sarah has said, the civic work at Queen Mary is, really led in many ways by our colleagues in the Centre for Public Engagement. And this is a really well-established centre. And again, I would say public engagement is so strategically really important at Queen Mary and has been valued and recognised, for a long time and is well established. And indeed, really national recognition. And I'll say it, I'm not directly in the centre, but I work really closely with colleagues. But the centre was the first to be awarded the Platinum Watermark from the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, of which we're really proud, and really reflects the depth and the, again, long-term and strategic commitment to public engagement across the work that we do. And so this really is drawing on public engagement culture, change expertise, including civic and community engagement as part of the sort of core remit of what the centre does. And I think that's really incredibly important in terms of really being able to launch, to be able to run that listening campaign and work effectively with community organisations as well as many other organisations, and to develop the Civic University Agreement. And then I'm the next person listed, so Deputy Vice Principal for Impact. And again, this is a new role. We previously had 1 Deputy Vice Principal for Impact. Since January, we've had 2. and my remit is civic, culture and community, and my equivalent's remit is commercialisation and enterprise. And I think, again, that sort of signals the strategic importance of our civic commitments. And then I report in this role to our Vice Principal for Policy and Strategic Partnerships, who's Philippa Lloyd, who's a member of Queen Mary's senior executive team. So again, we've got sort of right up through, and Philippa is clearly very involved with the Civic University Network as well, and will be chairing the advisory board of the NCIA, which is great. Next slide, please, Shireen. And just, I think this is probably the final one. Where are we now and what are we doing? What are our priorities at the moment? As Sarah said, we're mapping what's already happening at Queen Mary and mapping that against those priority areas to maximise the impact of the work that we're doing. And through that mapping, identifying where there might be some gaps, where there might be opportunities, also working really closely with London citizens and with other community partners and organisations to see what their priorities are in terms of how we can further develop our civic work. We're also going to be developing an evaluation framework for the CUA to enable us to track progress, and linking with the civic framework that's been developed by the Civic University Network as well, and really inspired by that to develop our own evaluation framework that maps onto our priority areas. And I think that's a really interesting process. I mean, all things around evaluation are, they're crucial, but actually thinking how best we can evaluate what we're doing. And again, sort of setting our priorities as we're moving forward. And then, as I've mentioned already, we're launching the Civic Champions Network in the spring. So that's our, and just to return to the very beginning, that we are, again, we hugely value and have benefited from our partnership with the Civic University Network, and really delighted to be part of the NCIA as well. And just the important, I'm a geographer by training. That's my other half of my week, is being a professor of geography at Queen Mary, and just the absolute commitment to place that's so central to civic work, but that commitment to place and the locally rootedness of that place, the ways in which that connects with many other local places. So I think that's what these wider networks are so important in doing, and how we can share best practice, learn from each other, see all of the links and the connections, not least because, Tower Hamlets might well, and other parts of East London, have much more in common with other parts of the country than with other parts of London. So that sort of sense of a rootedness in place, but not a boundedness in place, so sort of connectedness. And that's something that we're really committed to in all of our civic work. So we're very, thinking across those different scales as well. I think that's the final slide, so I shall stop there. Unless there's another one, Shireen. No, that was the final one. Thank you. But look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Sarah and Aston, thank you very much for what was a really interesting presentation of your story so far. Just going to take a couple of questions before we move on to the presentation from a colleague from Aston, which are sort of a couple of quite specific questions I thought was probably easy just to deal with now. The first one is for Alison, which was around who are the external partners on the Civic Advisory Board that you've set up?
I should say we're setting it up so that we're co-chairing it as well. So I chair it alongside a colleague from Tower Hamlets Council, who particularly leads on education, on employment and skills. And then we have other members from a range of different sectors, London citizens. I think we've invited the English National Ballet to join. Sarah Barnes, you can remind me of other people.
Yeah, we have. It's sort of the membership of the advisory board did grow a little bit organically, in the people that have joined our advisory board were actually quite involved in the listening and co-creation kind of process, and so they sort of became natural fits when we were looking for a kind of representation from a range of different sectors. So for instance, we have people from a couple of local education charities, people from local education providers, so for instance Newham College, also from the NHS Trust, so we're part of Barts and the London NHS Trust, and we have some people from the public health team there, and again people from Tower Hamlets Council, and also not forgetting those smaller kind of residents groups as well. So we have people from local residents associations and local informal residents groups nearby our campuses too.
That's great.
And the East London Business Association as well has another one.
Yes, yeah. So they're a local education charity that
Yep.
works and kind of across East London and particularly in Tower Hamlets.
Thanks very much, both of you. One more question before we move on to the next presentation. This was a question from Michael Eads, and probably is for Sarah. I think probably this is reflecting on my own sort of sense of you've done amazing amount of consultation, which is really quite impressive. And I suppose where Michael's coming from in his question is that is very impressive, and we're all perhaps a bit in awe of the amount you've done. A sense of how much resource has that taken? And Michael's interested particularly in what advice you might give people who maybe don't have quite so much resource, but would be very keen to do this sort of consultation. So if you wouldn't mind just responding to that, Sarah, that'd be really helpful.
Sure. And in the spirit of being honest, it has been very resource heavy, and we have less capacity in our team than ever before. So absolutely, we've had that capacity struggle too, in terms of getting the agreement to this stage, for sure. I think where we really valued and relied on was those pre-existing relationships, which I appreciate not everybody has in their institutions, depending on the levels of engagement that's already happening and how rooted institutions are in their place. So we've been a member of London Citizens for many, many years, for the past 20 years, starting with the Living Wage campaign, London Living Wage campaign, and also they challenge London Citizens are great at challenging us as an institution to think beyond what we think is possible within the realms of timeframes and everything else. And actually, it was them who pushed us also to be really ambitious in this piece. So we, like I said, we've been a member of them for many years, and we financially pay membership fees for that, but this was seen as an extra additional piece of work, which we were fortunate enough to go to our senior leadership team and request the funding to help support that campaign, because we were so low in capacity within our team. Now, in terms of the resource heaviness of it, I think that having, like I mentioned, that external expertise to both challenge us as an institution, but also to be able to have those frank and honest conversations with our local residents and our community organisations and other strategic stakeholders was super valuable through Emily and the ICS team, as well as through our organisers in London Citizens. So that's why we wanted to build our capacity through that external expertise, actually, rather than through us as a team and implementation at that time. I think in terms of human resource and kind of just getting going with less budget and less people, I think identifying those key players who are those critical friends of your institution, who you may or colleagues or academics who may work with particular stakeholders whose opinion can help shape what you do next, and having those informal chats to see and get that started and to build up into something a little bit larger. But I know, Michael, for instance, I know of your civic agreement, you focus on particular stakeholders within your place. And that's also another great approach, right? Because it means that your relationship with those particular groups and organisations may feel a lot more strategic as a result of your civic agreement. Whereas for us at the moment, because we've been quite broad scale and maybe a little bit more inclusive of a lot of other voices right now, we're still finding our way of what that actually means in implementation. So I think there are pros and cons of both ways of doing or approaching forming a civic agreement, but I think, and there's no right or wrong way, is there? So I think I know that's not as helpful and as practical as maybe what you wanted, but also happy to have a chat through any of that with anyone off this call if that's helpful.
No, Sarah, that is really helpful, I think, and that, as you say, there is no right way of doing this, and I think it's what's really interesting in these showcases is recognising the uniqueness of different institutions, and your institution is particularly unusual in your context, and so it's really interesting to hear the story. We'll have an opportunity after the next presentation to have a bigger sort of panel discussion, so we'll pick up some of those issues, I'm sure, again as we come back at the end. So I'd like to now welcome our colleague Angela Jeffrey from Aston University, who is going to talk us through their experience, the story from the Aston perspective. So over to you, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. that's a really hard act to follow after the amazing work of Queen Mary. But I'll give you a bit of a flavour of what we've been doing. So I'm Director of Regional Strategy, and I sit within our Research and Knowledge Exchange department. And can I have the next slide? So I've been at Aston for about 13 years, but I've been in this role just for the last 3 years. And so that was basically where we'd signed up the pledge to develop a civic university agreement, but that was pretty much it. So I moved into this role kind of thinking, okay, well, what do we do next? So I basically looked at what we had in place already, which was our beneficiary-led strategy, which has Region and Society as one of its 3 beneficiary groups. And at that time, we didn't have any kind of central support for that. And so I basically just sort of picked it up and then looked at what we could do with it. And so developing the civic agreement was kind of a key thing to move forwards with, which was really helpful at the time. But it was supported by our Vice Chancellor. And so it had kind of senior level buy-in that this was something that we needed to move forwards with. But it does fit with Aston's sort of general ethos, where we started off as a technical college in 1895, set up by the employers of Birmingham. So being focused on region and society, that was always something that we were doing. Can I have the next slide? So starting off, basically the Civic University Network was really helpful in kind of the journey and looking at and understanding what everyone else was doing. So when I first started, we basically developed our impact report just to understand what our narrative was and what our strengths were, and make sure that we'd actually got the evidence to demonstrate what our baseline was, what we were doing in the region already. And then from that, we then did a survey of citizens to understand what citizens in local wards understood about Aston, had they already engaged with us, and what did they think that we would, what our role should be, and also what were their priorities. So we've got BMG to do that kind of face-to-face research with over 400 people from the 6 local wards. And so Aston is in Birmingham, but one side of the university goes towards the city centre, where we're sort of 10 minutes out of town. But looking the other way, we hadn't really engaged with local communities very much. And so this was a really great opportunity to engage with them more. And it also came at the same time as there was quite a lot of bad press about universities. And so the Vice Chancellor was very keen at that time to kind of engage more, so that we had backing of local communities, that the universities were good things, and that we would all work together and support each other. And then we were really fortuitous. Just at the time that I started, the call came out from UKRI around public engagement for research. And I looked at who our partners were that we might be able to work with on that. And so we had a partnership with Aston Villa, and we were working together to develop Villa Vision, which was something where it's funded by the Premier League and the Players Association, where we're going into local schools to listen, to give information about eye health, but also do eye tests and give people glasses. And so that was just about to start. And I also saw that we'd got a good relationship with Citizens UK, which is similar to Queen Mary. And actually one of our leading professors, Professor Monda Ram from the Centre for Research into Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship, had moved with that relationship. And so he arrived in about 2018. So it was an opportunity to work with Aston Villa Foundation and Citizens UK, and actually go and listen to the different community groups in and around our campus. So we basically went in and listened to those communities about what their issues were with accessing eye health care before we started the Villa Vision van activity. And it was really helpful in understanding what the communities were around us, what their issues were with eye health, but it also raised a lot of other issues. And so it was really helpful kind of grounding in understanding what their needs were. And then following on from that, I then worked on some of the narratives for the knowledge exchange framework. And so those were around public engagement and local growth and regeneration. So that was also helpful in kind of gathering information around what we were already doing. Can I have the next slide, please? So alongside of that sort of evidence gathering, I then also looked at what our regional priorities were in terms of what were the combined authorities priorities, what did the local enterprise partnership have in their strategic economic plan, what did the City Council want to do, the Chamber of Commerce, Community Healthcare Trust and Citizens. So we listened to what Citizens UK's priorities were. So our chapter of Citizens UK have 9 different priorities that the chapter works together to support, and I'm on their leadership group, supporting them with in discussions with the mayor and various other people. So we've got a good understanding of that. We've also got the information from market research, and then the combined authority also at that time had a citizens panel to understand what they should be doing in response to COVID. So I sort of basically did a big matrix where I kind of looked at all of the priorities of all the different organisations, and then looked at what were they in kind of levels of priority. And can I have the next slide, please? And then also looked at what the university's expertise was, and then tried to kind of marry the two up together to see where we could really make a transformational difference. Within the university, we've got some university research institutes which we've invested heavily in, but we've also got some key civic strengths which through the Centre for Growth in terms of supporting local SMEs to grow and scale, the Centre for Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship, which focuses on inclusive growth, and they also have a business leaders project with Citizens UK where they listen to local business leaders around what their issues are, and actually have been sort of working with banks and government to help them understand where the gaps are in actual support for those businesses. And that also gave us a sort of longevity between me being on the leadership group and working with Citizens UK on sort of, especially around the health side of things, and then Mondo working on giving support through COVID for a lot of social enterprises and businesses to make sure that they didn't go under during the pandemic. And then we've also always had kind of a social mobility theme across the university. So we've always had a placement year, which we found was really important in terms of students that come from a sort of first in family to go to university don't necessarily always have the social capital that other students might have. And so going on the placement year with a business really helps them with getting a job at the end of it, and also understanding how to move forwards. We also have some pathways programs which are funded by, some of them funded by alumni and other organisations, where it helps students who are in school understand what they need to do to get into exclusive professions, so things like medicine, law, pharmacy, optometry and audiology, and that's been a really successful programme in supporting people so that they've then got things that they can talk about at their interview, and it's made them much more successful in accessing those courses. Can I have the next slide, please? So for our agreement, we had some of the obvious partners like the City Council and the Combined Authority, the Chamber of Commerce and the Local Enterprise Partnership. But we also had our really close relationship with Aston Villa Football Club, who are basically, they're based about a mile and a bit away from the university, and they've got a foundation which is focused on supporting the local community, so that there was an obvious fit there. We also have students as one of our main beneficiary groups, and we have a lot of local students. So working with the Students' Union was also really important to us. And then we've also got a strategic partnership with the Community Healthcare Trust that are based just over the road from us. So they were all partners that were quite obvious to us in terms of we were already working with them, and they were actually quite keen to be involved in the agreement. And then so after I'd done my mapping exercise and kind of got a few slides together around what we were thinking about, I then had meetings with each of the leaders of these different organisations to talk through what our plans were and get their buy-in and engagement on that. Next slide, please. So we also looked at where we might focus in terms of geography, and so obviously we're in Birmingham, but we're actually based sort of in between central Birmingham and North Birmingham, and then East Birmingham is it's an area of high deprivation where there's quite a big focus on supporting East Birmingham, so we wanted to make sure that that was included as well. Next slide, please. So we developed our Civic University Agreement. We actually developed it back in 2020, but we've just taken a long time to launch due to COVID. So this shows you the themes that we focused on. So we wanted to put citizens at the centre with economic recovery and social recovery from COVID-19, and then focused on health and well-being, inclusion and reducing inequality, support for businesses, sustainability and environment, crime and justice, and education and employment. Next slide, please. And so the focus was to make sure that we collaborated with our partners to amplify the impact of Aston's research, married up with our sort of business activities as an anchor institution, and then collaborate with other organisations to basically have a big impact on citizens and the region. Next slide, please. So in Birmingham, there's 5 universities and there's 12 in the wider West Midlands. So it's quite a complicated picture in terms of kind of trying to develop a collaborative agreement. And that was what we would have liked to have done. But only 2 of the 5 in Birmingham have signed up to develop civic university agreements. And so we would have liked to have just done one for all 5, or one between the 2 of us that were going forwards, but that wasn't possible. So when we went forward to Birmingham City Council to get our agreement approved, we went forward with the other university, but then I also went and spoke to the remaining 3, and they put forward papers around their civic and community engagement, so that we did have an overall picture around what the universities in Birmingham were doing to support the city. And then we did our official launch at Aston Villa, which is more in the community than inviting them to the university. And so that took place in June 2022. And our sort of future developments are that we will work with the Birmingham City Council City Board with all the other 5 universities to support the city. Next slide, please. So I just thought I'd mention a little bit about governance. And I don't think we've got quite as extensive governance as Queen Mary, but overall governance does sit with our executive. My manager is the Executive Director for Regional and Business Engagement, who sits on executive. We also have a knowledge and exchange oversight group, and so Regional Society and civic engagement is one of the strands of our knowledge exchange strategy, and so that has a group of associate deans that oversee that alongside the PVC for research and the Executive Director of Regional Engagement. Then the operations for our activity is in research and knowledge exchange. So I manage a team of sort of a small team of sort of 3 people, and then we work with each of the colleges and also the business operations of the university to try and get everybody pulling in the right direction. And we found it really helpful to have the civic agreement as a framework, to get people who are doing individual activities to now feel like they're part of something bigger, and it's been really positive in that side of things. Measuring of activities has been a bit more of a challenge. We are repeating our citizen survey, and so we're using the same questions that we used in 2019 and using the same wards, just so that we can get a comparison, so that we should be getting that research back at the end of the month, so that will be really interesting. Then we've got our KPIs, which were developed for the knowledge exchange strategy, but I think we've got more to do on that, and once we collect the data for this year, we'll probably refine the KPIs following that work. We're also developing a bit more sort of case studies and a CSR activity report, which will also then repurpose around our civic agreement with the different themes and add to it as well. And then we're planning an event to report back to partners and citizens, sort of doing a 1 year on in June 2023, ideally. Can I have the next slide, please? So I just thought I'd mention what we've done so far. So we launched our corporate social responsibility policy because for some reason we didn't have one. And that sort of, it was written to align with our civic university agreement. We did sponsor the Commonwealth Games, which was important for our city, and it really shone a good light on Birmingham, and it also meant that we supported our city council and combined authority. So although that was sort of, there were a few challenges around that, it did actually, it was really positive in the end, and I think it was really good for Birmingham. We've worked very closely with Citizens UK to support them with their 9 different priorities. But they also asked me to represent them on in terms of health inequalities. So we're involved. I'm involved in the Health Inequalities Board for the Integrated Care System, and have made sure that Citizens UK views are represented in that. And we've fed into so we did some more health listening events with Citizens UK partners, and fed that into the health inequalities strategy, and to make sure that citizens' views were represented. Then one of the other strands around citizens' priorities was being a region of welcome, and so we've signed the pledge to be to support the City of Sanctuary, and now we've submitted our University of Sanctuary application. And so we're just waiting for the outcome of that. And then in September, we became a living wage accredited employer, which was a really big, I was really pleased that we could do that because it was a real priority for Citizens UK and also for Birmingham. And we were the first university in Birmingham to do that. So we're really hoping that others will follow suit. And we're also part of the Birmingham Anchor Network, and becoming a living wage employer was also important for them as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So I just thought I'd mention a few of the sort of positives and challenges. So having the beneficiary-led strategy that the Vice-Chancellor had put forwards meant that we already had the senior level buy-in. Having the partnership with Citizens UK was central to everything that we do. And because I'm on the leadership group, I'm on their WhatsApp group, and so I see all of the things that they're worried about or activities that they're engaging in. So that's been really informative in terms of thinking about how we can best engage with them and how we can support them. Having the Centre for Research into Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship to support business leaders, but also engaging with different groups across the city has been amazing. And Mondaram's a real sort of leader in the field and an amazing person to work with. So that's just a really positive way of working for us. Then it was really timely to have the UKRI call around engaging citizens in research from deprived areas, and that facilitated a lot of our visits into local wards because it funded Citizens UK and also the community groups to do some of the work, and it gave us the opportunity to engage with them. We have had a few challenges. Ideally, I would like to have had a single agreement for Birmingham, and I still hope that will be the case in the future, but it wasn't possible at the time. Making the launch happen was actually a lot more challenging than I was expecting. Obviously, COVID did set us back on that, but getting 7 senior leaders together and then having a date, and then the football move to twice it clashed with our planned Civic launch. So that was slightly unfortunate, but at least it was third time lucky. Developing meaningful measures has also been interesting, and I think that's we're all on a journey of that together. But we'll report back on that. And then I suppose a particular challenge for us is some of our support for in our location is around using business support and also ESF funding around sort of diverse supply chains and supporting local communities with skills. And so the fact that UK Shared Prosperity Fund is going to be a lot smaller for the West Midlands because we did quite well out of ESIF. So a lot of our projects are coming to their end in 2023, and we're still trying to sort of struggling with how we will then sort of still take some of those forwards. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of next steps, we'll obviously continue our strong engagement with Citizens UK Birmingham chapter, and then we'll continue to engage with colleagues at our within our local partners to deliver on the themes. So we've got lots of I put in the chat, did put a link to our agreement, and you'll be able to see lots of the different projects that we've got going on in there. We've also got a new Vice Chancellor who's got a lot of ambition, and I think we'll be doing a lot more than we've got in the agreement going forwards. And he's also already said that place is one of his key themes. So we'll carry on in that direction, but I think we'll be supercharged because he's very ambitious. We're also developing our partnerships with Birmingham City Council, City Board and their corporate plan in coordination with the other universities. And then we're also working more closely with the Combined Authority and the other 11 universities through they have a sort of regular check-in meeting, and we're on their innovation board and we work closely with them anyway. And then ideally in the future, I'm dreaming that we'll have a Civic University agreement for Birmingham with all of the 5 universities. And that's it. I think next slide's just got my contact details on it. Thank you.
Angela, thank you very much. We don't have any immediate questions on your presentation, so I suggest we go into the panel. So if I could welcome back our colleagues from Queen Mary. Excellent. So it was very interesting, I think, to hear those very different contexts, really. And I think the challenge of being in Birmingham with the landscape there, very different from the Queen Mary, very interesting how we're all operating in different spaces with different political context, or different universities doing different things. So it's really interesting to see the contrast between the two. But there was also some quite interesting common themes coming through, which I think we might well get to pick up in the questions. One of the questions I just wanted to kick off with was to Angela, who you mentioned that you started with an impact study, and I wasn't quite sure whether that was a sort of an assessment of things you were doing, or whether it was actually a sort of measurement of impact that you'd had previously from activity. So if you could say a bit more about that, I think that'd be quite an interesting area to explore.
So we actually worked with Metro Dynamics, and
right.
and at the time they were doing the local industrial strategy for the combined authority, and they really helped us with kind of looking at the evidence that we had and then making that into narratives, so that but it was all backed up by evidence. So I can put into the chat just a sort of, we did a flip book of the summaries of the findings from that. So it did have things around kind of our procurement, how much we were spending locally, where our staff and different levels of staff, where they came from. So it was a really interesting exercise and really helpful in terms of sort of framing our narrative.
That sounds really interesting, and it would be great, I think, to share more of that, because I think many universities, including ourselves, are really struggling with how you put numbers, how you put measurement around. It's quite easy to describe what we do, but actually identifying the impact that it has on the local economy, on the local area, is a lot more challenging. And I suppose building on that, we have a question around, again, I think kick off with Angela, but I think it's equally relevant for colleagues from Queen Mary. And I suppose it's building on the question that I was already asking, really, but going forward, as opposed to looking at sort of when you started, it's what approaches have you, if any, put in place to measure your civic impact? So how are you going to measure? So perhaps, Angela, you could sort of start, because it builds on what you were just describing, and whether you're going to continue with that sort of model going forward.
So we're going to use the citizen survey and the sort of positive impression of Aston as one of the key metrics. So I think it was about 50% in the previous 2019 one, and we're hoping that it will have gone up in this round, but you never know. And then we're also using some of the Kpis metrics that are around public and community engagement as a starting point, and then something around how we engage with under 18s. So we're going to collect that data and see how it looks and whether it really represents what we're finding. But I think it is really challenging to not have too many metrics, but also to actually represent the full range of different activity.
Okay, thanks, Angela. Alison, I don't know whether you want to respond for Queen Mary.
I think it's something that we are really working on in terms of developing the evaluation framework and measuring impact. As I say, we've looked the framework that's been developed by the CUN has been really helpful. Also looking at the Civic Strength Index in that the GLA and the Young Foundation, I think, developed in London, is really interesting, which is very much in terms of quantitative measures of civic impact. So I think we're at the stage of really wanting to look at different approaches and wanting, a mix, and again, linking up with Kpis as well. Different metrics are already gathering, but also wanting qualitative sort of feedback as well as the quantitative. So a whole range of different things that we want to, and I think probably now we've got the structures in place around the Civic Working Group and the Advisory Board, just having an annual review in each of those groups in terms of reflecting back on the year and what we've done, and then identifying priorities for the following year within that wider framework of the agreement. But we will be developing sort of over the next term or so the more specific sort of evaluation methodology that we want to use. I don't know if Sarah B or G want to add anything to that.
Yeah, do come in, Sarah. Sarah, you're on mute at the moment. We can't hear you. Hopefully we can sort out your...
What about now?
Yes, we can now. Yeah,
Yay.
brilliant.
Do you know, I was just saying I'm not great with Zoom. And here we are.
No, that's fine. We can hear you now.
Just that, you know, we do a lot of data collection already. And I think we're going to have to work out what we can utilize that we already collect that can really contribute to our civic work. So, and you know, I think it's really interesting that when the metrics were decided for the KEF, they decided to move away from quantitative metrics for public and community engagement. So I think there's that balance to strike between making sure we tell the story, but also recognizing that it's not just about the number of things that we do, which is the thing that we're always struggling with.
And also that we want to evaluate the process, not just the outcomes. So it's both of those things. So really embedding evaluation all the way through, I think.
Thanks, Alison. I don't know whether the other Sarah, you didn't want to add anything. No, that's absolutely fine. No, I think this is a really interesting area around impact, where the more we share our experience and the more we, you know, as Alison said, we build on, you know, the framework that's been developed, and as we go into the accelerator, really putting energy into this whole sense of how do we, you know, not make an industry of it, as Sarah says, that it just doesn't work, but actually identify that we are able to demonstrate that we are having civic impact, and it's more than just the narrative, but equally the story is actually also very important. Another question I just wanted to pick up, and I suppose this was probably to both universities, really was this area. You've both described quite a bit about collaboration, and it made me think of something that someone had said to me a while ago when we were doing something, and they said, you know, you in a way make a choice. You either collaborate or you deliver. You can't do both. And I suppose I just wanted to put that challenge to you, really, is to because you've described a lot about collaboration, and I just wondered whether you were seeing a tension between collaboration and delivery. I'll start with Queen Mary's. I
would say person and SB and SG can come in as well, obviously, but I would say you deliver much better if you collaborate in the process. I think I would just really push back on that. I think collaboration in terms of identifying what it is that you're really wanting to address, what difference you're wanting to make, working together to achieve that, working together to evaluate how successful that's been, leads to effective delivery. So I would see collaboration as absolutely at the root of everything that we're doing in our civic work. That's
awesome.
And I would say it's not all or nothing, you know, at some points we might be doing more collaboration and you know, to this point, I think it's fair to say we've mostly been doing collaboration and not very much delivery, and that will hopefully shift as we move forwards. But if you put the trust in place that you will deliver, then that collaboration absolutely pays off, you know, further down the line.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Angela.
So I think there's different types of collaboration. I suppose what the collaboration that we've had for our civic agreement so far has been with partners who've been involved in it, and that's been really positive. And we've worked with each of them on different parts of the themes. So I would say that that's worked really, really well. I suppose the challenge is more how we then work with other universities and then all as a group then deliver for Birmingham, and that's the bit that I think is a little bit more challenging, because there is a bit of competition as well as collaboration there, and how we sort of divide it up. Is it geography? Is it by sort of the work that we do? I think that's where there is a bit of a challenge.
So sort of picking up that theme, which is one of the other questions that's come through, really, is you're both universities in quite a complex landscape of other universities, very different from our situation in Sheffield, where there are just two universities. And I suppose it's that sort of exploring a little bit around what I suppose are the challenges, and maybe start with Angela around, you know, what are the challenges of trying to get to the 5 universities working together. And I suppose also just picking up, quite interested to know a little bit more about some of the ways in which in London, in an even more complex environment, Queen Mary's is sort of navigating with the other universities to carve up a place that is not easily divided by the universities in that place. So I'd be just interested to, but maybe if we start with the sort of Birmingham context where you've sort of mentioned it already, Angela. What I suppose what would it take to get the 5 to come together in this context?
Well, I think what I'm seeing is the city board and working with the city council, with them as the drivers of these are the things that the place needs, should be, and they've just been working on kind of getting that board a bit more organised in terms of how it then feeds into the other universities. So we've got one university representative, which is from Birmingham City University, but there'll be closer engagement between those people, the different universities, to see how we can then support the city. So I think having an external driver where it's not led by one of the universities, it's led by the city council, will actually be really, really helpful in that. And we do work with the other universities in different, so in Citizens UK Birmingham chapter, we've got University of Birmingham and Newman University. So we work with them on specific projects. And then in the Birmingham Anchor Network, we work with University of Birmingham. So, and then obviously we do ad hoc projects with all of them. So there is sort of we do collaborate, but it's quite complicated because of especially then we're working with the Combined Authority, and there's different universities in that area, and then there's the wider West Midlands with different universities in that, and then we're in Midlands Innovation with East and West Midlands. Yeah,
I think your point about understanding and working with the political landscape that you're in is absolutely critical, because obviously we are all in different contexts, and actually one model of collaboration or one model of trying to make things work you can't just replicate it across the country. So it'd be interesting to go to colleagues where you're trying to work in the London context, which is obviously even more complicated in some ways, but in some ways less complicated because some of the structures I know that are in place that are making London work. So Alison, I don't know whether you want to just kick off on that.
Yeah, so certainly we're active members of various London-wide networks of universities. So London Higher, which is bringing together, all London universities, the London Leeds network, which is more the University of London. So there's various different networks that we're part of. But then more within East London, we work particularly closely with the University of East London, London Metropolitan University, in terms of particularly working with Tower Hamlets Council, with local authority. And that's worked really well in terms of working really closely together in terms of, all of attending meetings with the council, but actually working out that just one voice for those 3 universities can actually be very effective. And also doing a sort of a summary of all of the different engagements that each of our universities have had with the council, but doing that in one document, which again, I think is really useful. So a sense that the council is working with the 3 of those universities who all are, have students and have elements of our campuses on within Tower Hamlets, and certainly Queen Mary very centrally so. So that I think is a sort of locally based strong partnership that we have, and very positively.
Thanks, Alison.
SB and SG, you might want to add some more.
I think also we echo what Angela was saying around there are absolutely partnerships that happen locally within specific research areas or particular academics or on different projects and things like that. And actually it's knowing about those also that that is an exercise I think that would be super helpful for us, because I'm sure Angela would say that the institution-wide kind of partnership with other universities can be a lot more trickier to navigate and establish as such, but actually where locally for our local residents, community groups and projects and things, they don't necessarily need to understand the differences between us as institutions, as long as our values are there and are right, and when it comes to equitable collaboration and working with and for our communities. So I think there's a piece there definitely, and a challenge there for universities to put their ducks in a row or whatever for the perception of our places that we are in, because so often it doesn't matter to them, and so how do we have that balance of that competitiveness yet partnership and collaboration for the sake of the place we're in? Yeah,
thanks, Sarah. Sarah B, did you want to come in? No, you're okay. So I think there's quite interesting points there that you're bringing out around partnerships and working with people at different levels depending on what it is. And I think that's quite an interesting example in your Queen Mary context, isn't it? Because you're doing some incredibly local stuff, where you're working with the local partnerships around your absolute place, the sort of square mile around you. But then you're also doing stuff at that larger London wide setting. And I suppose that's quite interesting about Civic doesn't have to be one boundary. You can be operating in multiple civic spaces simultaneously. And I think that's quite something I think quite a lot of universities have slightly struggled with, trying to define civic as being a geographical area, which actually doesn't necessarily work for all things, because actually it can be different things for different purposes. And you have to some extent work with the boundaries of other organisations who are operating in a civic space, because if you're talking about a different boundary that doesn't work for them, it's very hard to have that civic engagement. Alison, I wasn't sure, did you want to come in again?
I was just going to add to that, and your question at the very beginning, Greg, around challenges. One of the aims and fundamental commitments of our civic agreement is that we're working across East London, so it's sort of inner East London as well as outer East London, and we have very strong partnerships and relationships, and very embedded in Tower Hamlets in particular, and also in Newham to a slightly lesser degree. But actually how we develop and extend our civic work across those other East London boroughs is something that we're really, again, committed to do, but that is taking us, that's something that will take, it's a sort of longer term plan, I think, put it that way. But yeah, absolutely, but not to be sort of bounded and fixed by, a set idea of a place in any limited way, a sort of more expansive sense of place, a civic place.
Thank you.
And Sarah G will laugh at this because it's something we've been grappling with, particularly with her role supporting community engagement for many years pre-civic work. We've been thinking about, like, what is community engagement and where does our community engagement take place at Queen Mary? And with our community engagement, we talk a lot about wherever people's research has an impact, but it's place-based and it's recognizing that particular community. And I think then at QM with our civic work, there was a bit of kind of an identity crisis to a certain extent, because civic work is by its very nature place-based and kind of has to respond to a place. But kind of taking that ethos, I think, has helped us a little bit with our community, building on our community engagement work.
Thanks very much. I think we probably are coming to the end of our questions. I just wanted to say thank you very much to all our participants today, both in terms of speakers, but also people joining in the event. As always, I find these things really fascinating. It's just so interesting to hear what we're all doing in our own places, the challenges, which often are very similar, but can be a little bit different. The context makes it different, but it's been interesting as we've done, various ones of these, how different things have come out. And some of the topics, themes today have been quite different from some of the discussions that we've had in previous sessions. I think the thing that's really come through to me today, which would be great to perhaps talk to you guys a bit more about how we might share some of this, is your sort of engagement with community groups and the way in which you've used some of the existing infrastructure that might be in place within your locality as a good starting point to to engage and to consult. And I think that's probably because you perhaps have been doing some of this stuff for longer, pre some of the sort of current civic labels. And I think it would be really good to capture some of that and share that more widely, because some of these things I've not come across before, and I think they've not come through in previous sessions. So I think that'd be really useful to dig a bit deeper into some of those, who are those groups? How do we perhaps, through the Civic University Network, build some national links into some of that, like Citizens UK? Could I be doing a bit more at the national level to build some relationships and stuff? So I think that would be really useful to pull through. Encourage people to connect with our newsletter, where we think the link is going in the chat. We share most information that is useful around updates and developments through the newsletter. And I think we mentioned earlier the upcoming event for London universities, and to encourage people to sign up for that if you are in the London area. I think those are the things I was required to update at the end of the session. So I think it just remains to say once again, thanks very much for everyone who's participated, particularly to our panelists today. Always interesting to hear what people have got to say. And as always, I think it's been a really stimulating discussion. So thank you very much, everyone. Okay, bye.